The gavel hit hard, and the room went silent. Every eye turned toward the bench. Every breath seemed to hold still. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson leaned forward, her hands folded, her face calm, almost too calm. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett sat poised but tense, her pen gripped tight between her fingers. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Beside her, her opponent sat back, lips curling into a smug smirk that seemed to stretch wider with every passing second. The silence cracked open. Opponent, smoothly, with false politeness. With all due respect, Justice Jackson, perhaps you've misunderstood the point. Whispers rose like smoke through the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched furiously against paper. Crockett's jaw tightened. She'd seen this tactic before, condescension disguised as civility. Ketanji didn't flinch. She didn't rush to speak. She let the silence do the cutting for her. Finally, she tilted her head ever so slightly, a single eyebrow raised. A challenge. Her voice came low, steady, and precise. Ketanji. Oh, I understand perfectly. That's why you're about to regret making it. The opponent's smirk wavered. A flicker, barely visible, but it was there. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, "Did she just?" and then stopped mid-sentence as Ketanji continued. "The record is clear," she said, her tone slicing through the tension like a blade. "Your argument rests on assumption, not fact. And assumptions." She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. "Don't hold up under the law." The opponent tried to laugh it off, but the sound rang hollow. Opponent. That's an interesting interpretation. Ketanji's eyes sharpened. It's not interpretation, she said, her voice like steel. It's reality. The room froze. Reporters leaned forward, breathless, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines. Crockett's shoulders loosened, just slightly, as if she could feel the tide beginning to turn. The gavel struck again, not to silence chaos, but to seal the blow. And as the echoes faded, the crowd realized they had just seen a career-defining takedown. But this fiery exchange didn't erupt from nowhere. It was years in the making. 2 days earlier, the story had barely made the headlines. By now, it was the only thing anyone could talk about. The case at the heart of the drama wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a battle for the country's direction. At stake, policies that would affect millions of lives. Cable news anchors framed it as a defining moment. Social media burned like wildfire, hashtags exploding across timelines. Hashtag Justice for All, hashtag Crockett Clash, hashtag High Stakes. Everyone had picked a side. Outside the courthouse, cameras crowded the steps like hungry vultures. Shouts from protesters mingled with chants of support and jeers of anger. Placards waved. Sirens wailed in the distance. And inside, the temperature felt just as volatile. Jasmine Crockett was no stranger to heated fights, but this was different. She wasn't just defending a legal principle, she was defending her reputation, her voice, and everyone counting on her to stand tall. From the moment she stepped through the courthouse doors, she felt the weight pressing down. Camera flashes blinded her as she entered, reporters shouting questions she couldn't answer. "Crockett, are you ready for this fight? Do you really think you can win?" She didn't respond. She couldn't afford to. Every word would be twisted before it hit the evening news. Meanwhile, her opponent thrived in the chaos. He strutted up the steps like a celebrity, pausing to shake hands and pose for the cameras. To his allies, he was a warrior. To his donors, he was an investment. And to Crockett, he was a threat, not because of his brilliance, but because of his ruthlessness. Somewhere in the crowd, a whisper turned into a rumor. "He's already got the decision locked down. He's untouchable. Crockett doesn't stand a chance." The press ate it up. Headlines blared their narrative. "Underdog faces political giant in explosive court showdown. Victory seems certain for establishment favorite." Even inside the courtroom, the imbalance was clear. The opponent's legal team sat in perfect formation, files neatly stacked, whispering like generals before battle. Their confidence wasn't just in their case, it was in their connections, their backroom deals, their belief that rules were made to be bent. Crockett's team was smaller, lean, focused, dismissed by many as inexperienced. The moment the gavel struck to open proceedings, it was clear this wasn't just a case. It was a war. And the first strike came not from evidence, but from performance. The opponent's opening statement was polished, rehearsed, dripping with self-assurance. He didn't just argue the facts, he performed for the cameras, playing to the court of public opinion as much as the bench. Opponent, smooth and mocking. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about politics. It's about the truth, and the truth is on our side. Laughter from his supporters rippled through the gallery. It was theater, pure and simple. And it worked. For now. Crockett sat silent, her hands steady on the table. Her calm wasn't weakness, it was preparation. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissive glance only sharpened her focus. She knew the stakes. Lose here, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of this courthouse. Policies reversed. Communities harmed. Narratives weaponized. Her opponent didn't just want to win. He wanted to crush her so completely that no one like her would dare challenge him again. And that was something she could not allow. As the crowd buzzed, as the judge signaled for silence, Crockett took a slow, measured breath. Every step in her journey had led here. Every doubt, every insult, every uphill battle. The gavel struck again. The real fight was about to begin. But before this clash reached its boiling point, the world needed to understand exactly who Crockett was up against. Long before the gavel struck, the opponent was already playing their game. Years before this courtroom showdown, they were just another ambitious figure climbing the political ladder. But unlike others, they didn't climb by building bridges. They climbed by burning them. In smoky backrooms and late-night strategy meetings, they learned the rules of power. Rules weren't meant to be followed. Rules were meant to be bent. And if that didn't work, they were meant to be broken. At first, they were subtle. Smiling handshakes. Polite speeches. A reputation for getting things done. The public saw a polished reformer. Behind closed doors, the reality was very different. Deals were whispered in private rooms. Promises traded like currency. Each step forward was paid for with loyalty, or silence. Their first real victory came during a heated local election. While their opponent campaigned with idealism and honesty, they went for the throat. Negative ads. Rumors seeded into newspapers. Leaked documents, some authentic, some carefully twisted. The result? A landslide victory that shocked analysts and silenced critics. It was the birth of their legend. From that moment, their smirk was always the same. Cold. Calculated. The smirk of someone who had tasted power and wanted more. Over the years, their methods grew sharper, crueler. They became famous not just for winning, but for humiliating those who stood against them. In debates, they wielded sarcasm like a sword. Their words didn't just defeat, they wounded. Opponent during a past debate. If you can't handle a little pressure, maybe you should stick to local politics. Laughter always followed. The crowd loved the spectacle. And every rival who walked off stage burned with shame. Whispers of scandal began to circulate. Contracts awarded to friends. Donations linked to shadowy groups. Policies suspiciously aligned with wealthy backers. Nothing ever proven, but always just close enough to stink of corruption. Critics tried to expose them, but those critics didn't last long. Some were pushed out of office. Others faded into obscurity. Each victory left another rival in ruins. Through it all, they perfected the art of control. Charm in public. Iron fist in private. When the cameras rolled, they played the role of the dedicated public servant. But behind the scenes, they were a kingmaker, and sometimes, a kingbreaker. The arrogance came slowly at first, then all at once. Soon, they weren't just confident. They were certain of their own invincibility. A mentor once tried to warn them, speaking softly in a rare moment of honesty. Mentor. Never underestimate someone with nothing to lose. The opponent laughed, brushing it off like a bad joke. Opponent. Please. They should be worried about me. That laugh echoed through every deal, every debate, every televised appearance. They believed they were untouchable. And now, with the courtroom case looming, they saw another easy victory. To them, Jasmine Crockett wasn't a threat, she was a footnote. Another idealist to be crushed, another notch in their belt. As they prepared for trial, their inner circle reassured them. The media narrative was on their side. The donors were ready. The public would see what they wanted them to see. Their confidence became a wall, blinding them to the storm gathering on the horizon. Because while they plotted and postured, Crockett was preparing. Silently. Relentlessly. And that arrogance would set the stage for the one person they never expected to meet, Jasmine Crockett. Before the nation knew her name, Jasmine Crockett was just a kid staring at a system that didn't see her. She grew up in a neighborhood where opportunity felt like a rumor, where rules seemed designed to keep people down instead of lifting them up. Her earliest memories weren't of toys or playgrounds. They were of watching neighbors fight battles they were never meant to win. Her father worked long hours, her mother balanced 3 jobs, and still, bills piled up on the kitchen counter like silent accusations. Crockett learned early that hardship wasn't fair, and neither was the world. At school, she was the kid who raised her hand too much, who asked questions teachers didn't want to answer. Some admired her curiosity. Others, not so much. One teacher pulled her aside after class, voice heavy with doubt. Teacher. Why fight battles you can't win? Young Crockett didn't hesitate. Crockett. Because someone has to win them. That single line defined her future. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about refusing to accept defeat as destiny. As she grew older, the battles only got harder. Scholarships were scarce. Opportunities even scarcer. Doors closed before she could knock. More than once, she was told she didn't fit the mold. Her silence in those moments was louder than their insults. She didn't argue. She worked harder. Every rejection became another brick in her foundation. Every sneer, every dismissal, every backhanded compliment fueled her determination to rise. When she decided to study law, people laughed. The idea of a girl from her neighborhood standing in a courtroom seemed absurd to them. The crowd laughed, until she kept talking. Until they realized she wasn't asking for permission. She studied late into the night, textbooks scattered across a borrowed desk. While others partied, she practiced arguments in the mirror, perfecting her tone, her timing, her control. When she finally entered law school, she wasn't the loudest voice in the room, she was the sharpest. Professors noticed. Classmates took notes. The same people who doubted her began to respect her, though many never admitted it out loud. Her first case as a young attorney was a disaster waiting to happen. She was assigned to defend a client everyone had written off. The prosecution was confident. The press ignored it entirely. But Crockett saw something others missed, truth buried beneath assumptions. She built her defense piece by piece, fact by fact, never relying on theatrics or shortcuts. The verdict shocked everyone. Her client was acquitted. The room erupted. And just like that, people began to realize Jasmine Crockett was a force to be reckoned with. From then on, she developed a reputation for calm under fire. Where others shouted, she stayed steady. Where others cracked, she remained unflinching. Her power wasn't in volume. It was in precision. Every word chosen like a blade, every pause carrying weight. Still, prejudice never vanished. At rallies and hearings, she faced sneers, dog whistles, and outright hostility. Commentators dismissed her as too inexperienced, too idealistic, or simply too much. Each insult stung, but it also strengthened her. Every time someone tried to silence her, her voice grew louder. By the time she stepped into the political arena, she was ready for war. Not the kind fought with weapons, but the kind fought with truth, grit, and relentless preparation. She didn't rely on flashy sound bites or dramatic stunts. She let her work speak. People began to notice. Her integrity was unshakable, her focus unmatched. Supporters gathered slowly at first, then in waves. Communities that had felt voiceless began to see themselves in her fight. She wasn't a savior, she was a mirror reflecting their strength back at them. Opponents, meanwhile, underestimated her at every turn. They mistook her calm for weakness, her restraint for passivity. It was their fatal mistake. When the courtroom case emerged, Crockett didn't see it as just another case. To her, it was a test. A chance to prove that power didn't have to corrupt, that dignity could still win. She spent weeks preparing, poring over every document, every precedent, every potential twist her opponent might throw at her. While others strategized in front of cameras, she strategized in silence. The night before the trial, she stood alone in her office, staring at a single sheet of paper, her opening words. She didn't smile. She didn't shake. She simply breathed, steady and sure. The next morning, when she walked into the courtroom, she carried not just her arguments, but the weight of everyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or silenced. To her opponent, she was just another name on a docket. To the people, she was hope personified. And when her path finally crossed with the opponent's, it was more than politics. It was personal. The first round of questions felt like knives wrapped in smiles. Crockett sat tall at her table, hands folded, her expression calm. Her opponent lounged back in his chair, radiating arrogance. The room smelled of tension, sweat, paper, and anticipation. He struck first. His tone was smooth, rehearsed, designed to provoke. Each question wasn't meant to seek truth but to humiliate, to paint Crockett as out of her depth. Opponent: Tell me, Ms. Crockett, have you actually read the full statute, or are you just improvising? Gasps rippled across the benches. Whispers rose like smoke. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching like claws. Crockett's jaw tightened, but her voice was steady. Yes, she said, clear and precise. And unlike you, I've read the parts you conveniently skipped. The smirk wavered, just slightly. The opponent recovered, flashing a grin for the cameras. He pivoted, shifting from legal points to personal jabs. Theatrics over substance. The gallery chuckled nervously. Opponent: Maybe if you spoke less, you'd understand more. Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, her reply swift as a blade. Crockett: Funny, I was about to say the same to you. Laughter broke through the tension, this time aimed at him. His smirk faltered again, but he pressed on, his voice growing sharper, louder. Bang! The gavel cracked like thunder. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's calm voice cut through the noise. This is a courtroom, not a stage, she warned. Stay on point. The opponent nodded respectfully, then immediately ignored her. He turned back to Crockett, doubling down. Accusations flew. Twisted statistics, exaggerated claims, veiled threats. Crockett countered with facts, her tone controlled, but the strain showed in her clenched hands. The audience leaned forward, sensing the boiling point approaching. Each exchange grew hotter, voices overlapping. The gavel struck again and again, but it was like trying to silence a storm. Even reporters stopped writing, their attention locked on the unfolding spectacle. The opponent went in for the kill, stepping closer, towering over her desk. His shadow fell across her notes like a threat. Opponent: You're out of your depth, Ms. Crockett. Admit it, and save yourself the embarrassment. For a heartbeat, silence. Crockett looked up, meeting his gaze without blinking. Her voice was low, calm, but edged with steel. Embarrassment? No. She leaned forward slightly. But you should be very familiar with the concept. The room erupted. Gasps. Murmurs. A flash of cameras like lightning. The opponent's face flushed, his polished composure cracking for the first time. He tried to speak, but his words tangled in fury. Bang! The gavel struck so hard it echoed off the walls. Justice Jackson rose slightly from her seat, her presence commanding instant silence. Even the most arrogant voices stilled. Her eyes swept the courtroom, sharp and unyielding. This ends now, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The room froze, waiting. Every reporter, every spectator, every player in this political theater felt the shift. And then, with the whole room watching, Justice Jackson leaned forward. Every word from Justice Jackson landed like a hammer striking steel. The courtroom went silent as she rose fully from her seat, her robe flowing like a shadow stretching across the room. The opponent froze mid-sentence, his mouth still open, his smirk finally gone. Justice Jackson's gaze swept over him, sharp and unyielding. Her voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that makes storms run for cover. "You've spent the last hour speaking loudly," she said, her tone slicing through the air. "But not once have you spoken truth." A collective gasp rippled through the benches. Reporters nearly dropped their pens. Even Crockett felt a shiver run through her spine. The opponent tried to recover, flashing a nervous smile. "Opponent. Your Honor, with all due respect." Jackson didn't let him finish. "Ketanji. What you've just argued isn't law. It's theater, and poorly written theater at that." Laughter burst from the back rows before being instantly silenced by a single glare from the bench. The sound echoed in the opponent's ears like a verdict. His face flushed crimson. "You claim to defend justice," she continued, stepping carefully through his arguments like stepping stones, breaking each one beneath her feet. "But let's be clear, your evidence is incomplete, your citations are selective, and your conclusions are built on sand." Bang! The gavel struck, punctuating her words. "The court will not be swayed by volume or performance. It will be guided by fact." She turned toward the audience, her voice rising. "This case is about truth. And the truth does not belong to the loudest voice in the room." Phones lit up like fireflies as spectators typed furiously, knowing they were witnessing history. The live stream chat exploded, comments flying faster than moderators could track. Within minutes, #JusticeForAll began trending nationwide. The opponent stumbled forward, desperate to regain control. His papers rustled violently as he snatched them from the table. "Opponent. I object." Jackson's stare was ice. "Ketanji. You may. But the facts do not." The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Cheers. The muffled click of cameras capturing the exact moment arrogance shattered into panic. The opponent's voice cracked as he tried again. "This is outrageous. You're ignoring precedent." Jackson raised a single eyebrow, a challenge sharper than words. "Precedent?" she repeated. Then she reached for a case file, flipping through it with measured precision. "Allow me to remind you of the very precedent you are misrepresenting." She read aloud a passage so damning, so contradictory to his argument, that his own team buried their faces in their hands. The gallery buzzed with disbelief. Crockett's lips curled into the faintest smile. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. When Jackson finished, she didn't slam the file shut. She simply let the silence do the work. And it hit harder than any shout. The opponent opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came. For the first time, he was exposed, not as a master strategist, but as a fraud. Crockett rose slowly, deliberately, her presence radiating quiet strength. When she spoke, her tone was respectful, but her words carried fire. "Crockett. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to add a final point." Jackson nodded. "Proceed." Crockett turned to face the opponent directly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You've spent this entire trial trying to convince everyone here that power equals truth," she said. Her voice grew steadier with every syllable. "But power built on lies collapses the moment truth walks in the door." The gallery erupted again, louder than before. Phones shot upward, capturing the perfect image, Crockett standing tall, the opponent shrinking back. Her final line came like a dagger. "Crockett. And today, truth just walked in, and it's not on your side." The opponent slammed his fist on the table. "Objection!" he screamed. But the words sounded hollow, meaningless. Jackson's gavel struck once, twice, 3 times. The thunderous sound brought instant silence. "This court has heard enough," she declared. "Arguments built on distortion will not stand. The ruling will reflect the facts, nothing more, nothing less." The finality in her tone left no room for doubt. The opponent sagged back in his chair, defeated. His smirk, the same smirk he'd worn for years, was gone, erased in a single, devastating moment. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate. Crowds cheered, tears streaming down faces. On social media, clips of Jackson's words spread like wildfire. #JusticeForAll trended in every major city within the hour. News anchors scrambled to rewrite their scripts. Commentators who had bet against Crockett were forced to admit they'd been wrong. This wasn't just a win, it was a reckoning. Inside, Crockett turned toward her team. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She had fought not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced or dismissed. And she had won. As the opponent gathered his papers with trembling hands, a final image locked into the minds of everyone watching. Crockett and Jackson, standing united, symbols of strength and clarity against corruption and deceit. The gavel struck one last time, sealing the moment forever. But as the shockwaves spread, nobody expected what came next. By nightfall, the moment had become a movement. What had started as a single courtroom clash now rippled through the country like a lightning strike. Clips of Justice Jackson's takedown spread across every platform. Within an hour, #JusticeForAll was trending nationwide, drawing millions of views. Cable news anchors replayed the footage on loop, their voices breathless. "This," one commentator declared, "is the most devastating courtroom moment we've seen in years." Outside the courthouse, Crockett stepped into a storm of flashing cameras. Flashes turned her silhouette into legend. Reporters shouted over each other, their questions blending into chaos. "Jasmine, how does it feel to win against impossible odds? Do you think the ruling will affect upcoming elections? What's your message to young women watching tonight?" Crockett didn't answer. Not yet. She simply walked forward, calm and composed, every step a declaration of dignity. Some cheers, some jeers, all louder than before. Supporters waved signs, their voices breaking with emotion. Critics booed from the shadows, their words drowned out by the crowd's roar. Her calm smile said everything. She didn't need to speak, the world was already speaking for her. Meanwhile, inside a darkened hallway, the opponent slumped against the wall, surrounded by frantic aides. His voice was hoarse from shouting, his tie askew. The smirk that once defined him had vanished completely. "Opponent. They ambushed me. This isn't over. I'll spin it. No," one aide interrupted, their voice sharp. "Sir, the numbers are catastrophic. The narrative is gone." On a nearby screen, the trending hashtag glowed like a neon wound, #JusticeForAll. Clips of Crockett and Jackson dominated every feed. Even rival networks united in shock. The opponent's hands trembled as he watched a slow-motion replay of his own defeat. Each frame another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Back outside, Crockett paused on the courthouse steps. The crowd erupted into chants of her name, their voices swelling like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. A young girl pushed through the crowd, holding a handmade sign. "You stood for US." It read in uneven letters. Crockett knelt down, meeting the girl's eyes. "You stand for you, too," she whispered with a smile. The cameras caught the moment, immortalizing it instantly. Within minutes, that single image went viral. Commentators called it the picture of the decade. Inside newsrooms, chaos reigned. Producers yelled, phones rang, headlines changed by the second. Every outlet scrambled to claim they had predicted this outcome, though few truly had. Political strategists debated furiously on live panels. Some framed the ruling as a turning point for justice. Others warned of backlash and retaliation. But one thing was undeniable: Crockett had become a symbol. Not just of victory, but of what courage looked like in real time. As night deepened, Crockett finally spoke to the press. Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen. "This wasn't about me," she said. "It was about truth. About holding power accountable. And about showing that dignity will always rise above deceit." The crowd roared, their cheers echoing off the courthouse walls. Even some reporters joined in the applause. Behind her, Justice Jackson stood silently, her presence alone enough to remind everyone who had struck the first blow in this reckoning. Far away, in the opponent's private residence, the lights stayed off. The man who once ruled rooms with arrogance now hid from the world. His phone buzzed endlessly with unanswered calls. The opponent vanished into the shadows, leaving only silence behind. On social media, the momentum only grew. Celebrities tweeted their support. Grassroots groups used the moment to rally for reform. Comment threads overflowed with gratitude, outrage, and hope. By midnight, one message had been shared over 1 million times. Truth won today. And we all felt it. The energy was electric, unstoppable. It was no longer just a court case, it was a cultural flashpoint. As Crockett looked out over the sea of supporters, a single thought crossed her mind. This was bigger than her now. Bigger than the courtroom. Bigger even than the opponent she had just defeated. The question was no longer if this would change things. It was how far the change would reach. But one question remained: what did it all truly mean? In the quiet after the storm, the real lesson became clear. The courtroom was empty now, but echoes remained. The gavel's final strike still seemed to vibrate in the air, a reminder that truth had spoken and been heard. Crockett stood alone for a moment, staring at the empty seats where, just hours ago, chaos had reigned. The cheers were gone, the cameras packed away, but the weight of what had happened lingered like smoke after a fire. Justice Jackson's words replayed in her mind. "This court will be guided by fact. Simple. Direct. Unshakable." And yet Crockett knew how fragile such victories could be. For every moment of clarity, there were countless forces working in the shadows, ready to twist truth back into lies. The opponent's downfall had been poetic, almost cinematic, a man undone by his own arrogance. But Crockett also knew this wasn't the end of him. People like that rarely vanished forever. They regrouped. They plotted. And they waited for the next chance to strike. She walked slowly toward the judge's bench, running her hand along the polished wood. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but unbroken. This fight had never been just about winning a single case. It was about showing that dignity could stand against deceit. That facts could cut through propaganda. That a single voice could still cut through the noise. For so long, the system had seemed too big to challenge, its walls too high to climb. But today, for one brief and shining moment, those walls had cracked. Outside, the world was still buzzing. Screens glowed in windows across the city. News alerts flashed like sirens. People were talking, arguing, hoping. And deep in that noise was a signal, a reminder that truth still mattered, even in the chaos of politics. Crockett thought back to her younger self, the girl who had once been told to pick easier battles. The one who had been laughed at, dismissed, underestimated. That girl had stood her ground, even when no one believed in her. And now, here she was, standing at the center of a moment that could ripple outward for years. Her teacher's old question echoed in her mind. "Why fight battles you can't win?" Her answer came as a whisper, just for herself. "Crockett. Because someone has to win them." The moral was clear, though bittersweet. Justice wasn't a single victory, it was a relentless pursuit. Each win was a torch passed to those willing to keep fighting, even when the darkness seemed endless. Crockett knew there would be more opponents, more smirks, more battles fought in rooms just like this one. But she also knew something far more powerful: arrogance could be loud, but truth could be louder. As she stepped outside, the night air was cool against her face. Supporters waited at a distance, still chanting, still hopeful. Their voices were tired, but they didn't stop. Crockett didn't raise her fist or make a grand speech. She simply nodded to them, a silent promise that the fight would continue. The cameras caught that moment too. Not as a viral clip, but as something quieter, deeper, a symbol of resolve. Justice Jackson emerged behind her, standing tall and silent. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. The two women understood each other perfectly. This wasn't just their story. It belonged to everyone who had ever been silenced, and everyone who had ever dared to speak anyway. Somewhere in the distance, a single voice rose above the noise, chanting Crockett's name. Then another joined. And another. Until the sound swelled again, not as chaos, but as harmony. The room was empty now, but echoes remained. And for those ready to fight, the story isn't over. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was a message to anyone watching. Justice Jackson's voice. Crockett's courage. A single moment where truth stood tall, and arrogance crumbled. But that moment doesn't live here alone. It lives in every conversation, every shared clip, every person who refuses to be silent. The fight for truth doesn't end when the gavel falls. It begins again, with you. When you speak, when you vote, when you demand accountability, you become part of this story. One voice. Then another. Until the noise becomes impossible to ignore. So don't just watch this moment. Carry it forward. Share it. Talk about it. Make it louder than the lies. Like, subscribe, and join this community of people who believe dignity can still win. Because history isn't written by the powerful. It's written by those brave enough to fight them. The gavel struck once tonight. Let's make sure the echoes never fade.